The village of Stonehaven sat at the bottom of a wide valley, surrounded by tall gray mountains on every side. It was a quiet place, full of simple people who worked the land and kept to themselves. But every person in Stonehaven knew one thing: the mountains were not safe. The mountains belonged to the dragons. His name was Aldrich, and he was a knight. Not the kind of knight that people sang songs about. He had no shining castle. He had no army behind him. He had a sword, a horse, and a worn leather chest plate that had been patched so many times it barely looked like armor at all. He was tall and broad in the shoulder, with dark, tired eyes and a short, rough beard that he never seemed to find time to shave. He had been riding for 3 days when he came to Stonehaven, and his horse was almost as tired as he was. He rode into the village just as the sun was going down. The sky behind the mountains had turned deep orange and red, and long shadows fell across the dirt road. A few people looked at him from their doorways. Some of them stepped back inside and closed their doors. They knew what a sword meant. It meant trouble was coming, or trouble had already come. Aldrich stopped his horse near the center of the village, where there was a well and a small fire burning in an iron basket. An old man sat beside the fire. He had white hair and a long white beard, and he was wrapping a piece of rope around a stick with slow, careful hands. He did not look up when Aldrich stopped in front of him. "Is there a place to sleep in this village?" Aldrich asked. His voice was low and rough from not speaking for days. The old man kept working the rope around the stick. "There is an inn," he said, "but you should not stay long." "Why is that?" The old man finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue like ice. "Because the dragons have been restless," he said. 3 nights ago one flew over the village, very low, lower than they usually go. It did not burn anything. It just looked. That is worse. Aldrich looked up at the mountains. The last light of the sun was fading behind them. The peaks were dark shapes against the sky, still and silent. "Why is that worse?" he asked. "Because when they burn they are hungry," the old man said. "When they look they are choosing." Aldrich did not say anything to that. He tied his horse to a post near the well and found the inn, which was a low building with a crooked door and a small yellow light in the window. Inside, it smelled like smoke and old bread. A woman with red hair and a tired face gave him a bowl of soup and a room with a narrow bed. He ate the soup without tasting it and went asleep with his sword beside him. In the morning, he learned what he had come to Stonehaven for. Her name was Marin, and she was the daughter of the village elder. She was not tall, but she stood straight and she looked at Aldrich without flinching, which was more than most people did. She had dark hair tied back from her face and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She had sent word to the city 3 weeks ago, asking for a knight. Aldrich was the only one who had come. "We need someone to go into the mountains," she said. They were sitting at a wooden table inside the elder's house, which was slightly bigger than the other houses but just as plain. "There is a dragon up there, not one of the wild ones. This one is different. It is old and it is angry and it has been coming lower every week. Last season it took 2 of our goats. This season it took a man." "Who?" Aldrich asked. "My father," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had already cried for him, Aldrich could tell. Now she was past crying. "He went up the mountain path to try and speak with it. The old stories say that some dragons can be spoken to. He believed that. He never came back." Aldrich looked at the table for a moment. "You want me to kill it?" "I want you to end this," she said. "However that needs to happen." He looked at her. "Killing a dragon is not a simple thing." "I know that," she said. "That is why I sent for a knight and not a farmer." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Tell me what you know about this dragon," he said. "Everything." Told him. "It was large," she said. "Larger than the wild mountain dragons that sometimes flew in packs over the valley. It was dark red, almost brown, like dried blood. It had been living in the mountains above Stonehaven for as long as anyone could remember. The old people called it Verath, though no one knew what the word meant or where it came from. It did not hunt the village often. For many years it had left them alone. But something had changed. Something had made it angry or hungry or both. And now it was coming lower and lower, and soon it would not just take goats and old men. Soon it would take everything. Aldrich listened to all of it without speaking. When she was done, he sat quietly for a while, thinking. Outside the window, the mountain stood in the morning light, cold and gray and very large. "I will need rope," he finally said, "and iron spikes, and someone who knows the mountain paths well enough to guide me to the upper ridges." Maren nodded. "I will guide you." "No," he said. "My father is dead," she said, "and I know every stone on those paths better than anyone alive. You need me." She looked at him with those sharp brown eyes, and he could see that she had already made her decision long before he arrived. She was not asking, she was telling. He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded once. "We leave at first light tomorrow," he said. "Get the rope and the spikes, and wear something you can move in." That night Aldrich sat outside the inn and looked at the mountains in the dark. Somewhere up there, something old and powerful and very angry was waiting. He had fought men. He had fought beasts. He had never fought a dragon. But he had made a living from doing things he had never done before, and he was still alive. That had to count for something. He cleaned his sword by the light of the fire, and he waited for morning to come. The morning came cold and gray, with a thin mist hanging low over the valley. Aldrich was already awake when Maren knocked on the door of the inn. She had a pack on her back, a short knife at her belt, and strong boots that had clearly seen many miles of hard ground. She handed him a coil of thick rope without a word. He tied it to his own pack, checked his sword, and they set off toward the mountain path before the rest of the village had woken up. The path started wide enough, a beaten track of pale stone that wound up through low gray grass and scattered rocks. But after the first hour, it began to narrow. The grass disappeared, replaced by loose stones and patches of dark moss. The mist thickened around them as they climbed, turning the world quiet and white. Aldrich could hear nothing but their footsteps and the distant sound of wind moving through the high rock faces above. Maren walked in front. She moved quickly and surely, stepping over loose stones without looking down, ducking under low-hanging rock shelves with the ease of someone who had walked this path many times. Aldrich followed, watching the ground and the sky in equal measure. "How far up did your father go?" he asked after a while. "As far as the second ridge," she said without slowing. "There is a wide flat space there between two rock walls. He called it the speaking place. He believed that was where the old people used to meet with the dragons long ago." "Did it ever work?" Aldrich asked. "The speaking in the old stories?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "the stories say that dragons are not just animals. They think, they remember, they can understand words if they choose to, but they do not always choose to. And if they choose not to, then they burn you," she said simply. They walked on. The mist began to thin as they climbed higher and the world opened up around them. Aldrich could see the valley far below now, Stonehaven a small cluster of brown shapes at the bottom, the river that ran through it a thin silver line. The sky above was pale and wide. No dragons yet. They stopped at midday on a flat ledge where a thin stream of water ran down the rock face. Aldrich filled his water skin and ate a piece of hard bread from his pack. Maren sat on a stone and looked out over the valley. Her face was still and unreadable. "You should tell me about your father," Aldrich said. "What kind of man he was." She looked at him. She seemed surprised by the question. "Why?" "Because people who go looking for dragons usually have a reason that matters," he said. "Your father had a reason. I want to understand it." She was quiet for a moment, then she looked back at the valley. "He was a careful man," she said. "Not a brave one, not in the way people usually mean. He was not big or loud. But he thought about things for a long time before he acted. He believed that most problems, even terrible ones, had solutions that did not require violence. He believed that if you took the time to understand something, you could find a way to live alongside it." She paused. "He was probably wrong about the dragon, but I do not think he was wrong about the idea. Aldrich said nothing. He finished his bread and they moved on. By mid-afternoon they had reached the second ridge. The path leveled out onto a wide flat area of pale stone, just as Marin had described. On two sides, tall rock walls rose up, streaked with dark watermarks. On the third side, the ground fell away sharply into open air, with a long view down the mountain and across the valley. The fourth side opened into a narrow pass that led higher still. The place was very still. The wind dropped almost completely here, and the silence was the thick, heavy kind that makes a person want to speak quietly. Marin stopped at the edge of the flat area and looked up. Aldrich stopped beside her, and then he saw it. High up, moving against the pale sky with slow, wide strokes of its wings, the dragon was circling. It was enormous. Even at that distance, it was clearly enormous. Its body was long and heavy, its wings spreading wide with every beat, the undersides catching the gray light and showing a dark red that was almost brown. It moved with a strange ease for something so large, like a leaf turning slowly in a wind, unhurried and completely in control. It had already seen them. Aldrich was certain of that. It was circling lower. "Do not draw your sword yet," Marin said quietly. Her voice was very steady. "I was not going to," he said. "Good." She stepped forward, away from the rock wall, into the open center of the flat space. She was making herself visible, making herself known. Aldrich stayed where he was, watching the dragon above and watching Marin below, his hand resting but not gripping the hilt of his sword. The dragon came lower, one wide circle, then another. Then it folded its wings and dropped, not like a fall but like a choice, a controlled and deliberate descent, and it landed at the far edge of the flat stone with a sound like a heavy cart hitting cobblestones. The ground shook once under Aldrich's feet. Up close it was even larger than it had looked in the air. Its head was the size of a large horse. Its neck was long and thick, and it moved slowly as the dragon turned its gaze toward them. Its eyes were yellow, a deep burning yellow with a dark slit of a pupil, and they were without question the eyes of something that thought. It looked at Marin, it looked at Aldrich, it looked at Aldrich's sword. Then it made a sound, not a roar, something lower, something that vibrated in the stone under their feet and in the air around them. A sound like a question or a warning or both. Marin spoke, her voice was clear and unhurried. "We have come to speak," she said, "not to fight. My father came here before me. His name was Edrin. He was an old man with white hair who walked slowly. I think you remember him." The dragon's yellow eyes moved to her face. It was still, very still, the kind of stillness that was not peace but listening. Aldrich held his breath and did not move. The dragon did not move for a long time. It sat at the edge of the flat stone like a mountain that had decided to breathe, its great wings folded against its sides, its yellow eyes fixed on Marin's face. The silence between them was the kind that felt alive, the kind that something could break at any moment in any direction. Then it spoke. The sound it made was not a human voice. It was deeper than that and wider, like a voice that came from inside the rock rather than from a throat. But it was words. Slow words, each one pressed out carefully, like a person who had not spoken a language in a very long time and had to search for each piece of it. "I remember," it said. "The old man, he sat, he talked, he was not afraid." Marin's breath caught for just a moment, then she steadied herself. "He was my father," she said. "What happened to him?" The dragon's eyes moved slowly down and to the side as if it was looking at something on the ground that was not there. "He fell," it said. "The path above the ridge. He walked too far. I did not touch him." The yellow eyes came back to Marin's face. "He was old. His legs were not good." Marin stood still for a long moment. Aldrich watched her face and saw the exact moment when something hard inside her gave way a little, not breaking but softening. Her father had not been killed. He had fallen. He had been an old man who had walked too far up a dangerous mountain and he had fallen. She had been preparing herself for something much worse, and the truth, though painful, was smaller than what she had been carrying. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. The dragon made that low, vibrating sound again, not threatening, something else. "You came for a reason," it said, "not only for the old man." "Yes," she said. "The village below, Stonehaven, you have been coming lower. You took a man's goats. You frightened people. They are afraid of what comes next." The dragon's great head turned slowly, and it looked out over the edge of the flat stone, down the long slope of the mountain toward the valley below. Its expression, if it could be called that, was something between distant and sad. "I know the village," it said. "I have watched it for longer than the oldest person living there has been alive. I watched it when there were half as many houses. I watched it when there were twice as many. I have never burned it." "But you have been coming closer," Aldrich said. He had not meant to speak yet, but the words came out. Both Marin and the dragon looked at him. He kept his voice level. "Something changed. What was it?" The dragon looked at him for a long moment. Its yellow eyes were steady and unblinking. Then it turned its head and looked up the mountain, toward the narrow pass that led higher still. "Come," it said. It stood, spreading its wings once and folding them again, and began to walk toward the pass with slow, heavy steps. Marin looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at the dragon. He put his hand briefly to his sword hilt, not drawing it, just checking it was there. Then they followed. The pass above the flat stone was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The dragon moved through it with surprising ease for its size, squeezing through the rock gap with a patience that seemed practiced. On the other side, the mountain opened up into a wide, shallow bowl of stone, sheltered from the wind on all sides. It was warmer here, and it was the reason for everything. In the center of the stone bowl, there was a nest. It was enormous, built from whole trees that had been dragged up from somewhere far below, their trunks stripped of branches and packed together with stones and dried grass, and what looked like pieces of old metal, chains and broken wagon wheels and other things the dragon had collected over many years. And in the middle of the nest, half buried in the packed material, were two large eggs. They were dark red, like the dragon's own scales, and each one was about the size of a large barrel. They were not hatching, they were not moving, but they were cracked. Not from hatching, cracked badly along the sides in jagged lines that told a story of impact rather than new life. Someone had been here. Someone had tried to break them. Aldrich felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Men came," the dragon said. It stood at the edge of the nest and looked at the eggs with those yellow eyes, and for the first time Aldrich heard something in its voice that was not just sound. It was pain. Old, deep, slow pain. 3 of them with hammers and fire of their own. I was hunting, far away. When I came back they were here. I drove them off. But the damage was done. "Are the eggs alive?" Marin asked softly. "One," the dragon said. "The smaller one, it still breathes, I feel it. The larger one is gone." The silence in the stone bowl was very heavy. Aldrich stood looking at the cracked eggs, and he felt something that surprised him. Not just anger at the men who had done this, though he felt that clearly. Something deeper. Something about the wrongness of it. He had come up this mountain thinking about duty and danger and a village that needed protecting. He had not expected to feel something like grief for a dragon's child. "Who were they?" he asked. "The men with the hammers." The dragon looked at him. "I do not know their names," it said, "but they wore a mark, a circle with a line through it, on their coats." Aldrich knew that mark. He had seen it before, on men who worked for a man named Torven, who lived in the city 2 days east of Stonehaven. Torven was a merchant who traded in rare things. Dragon parts were among the rarest and most valuable things in the known world. Scales, teeth, and above all, eggs. The dragon had not been coming down the mountain out of hunger or madness. It had been coming down looking for the men who had hurt its young. And the village, sitting at the bottom of the mountain, was the closest place to start looking. Aldrich turned to Marin. "This is not what we thought it was," he said. No, she agreed. She was looking at the nest with an expression he could not fully read. Then she looked at the dragon. We did not know about this. The village did not send those men. We would never do something like this. The dragon looked at her for a long time. I know, it said finally, but I did not know who to trust. I did not know where else to look. It lowered its great head until it was almost level with the ground, and the gesture was so clearly one of exhaustion and sorrow that Aldrich had to look away for a moment. I am very tired, the dragon said quietly, and I am very angry, and I do not know how to be both of those things without becoming something I do not want to be. Aldrich looked at his sword, then he looked at the cracked eggs, then he looked at the dragon. Tell me everything you remember about those men, he said. I am going to find them. They came back down the mountain as the sun began to drop behind the western peaks. The dragon did not follow them past the flat stone at the second ridge, but it watched them go, standing at the edge and looking down with those burning yellow eyes until the path curved, and they could no longer see it. The watching felt less like a threat now and more like something quieter. Hope, maybe. The kind of hope that a person holds very carefully because they have been disappointed too many times before. Marin did not speak for most of the descent. Aldrich let her be quiet. He walked behind her and thought about what he had learned, turning it over in his mind the way he turned a stone over to look at the other side. Torven. He had heard that name in the city before he rode to Stonehaven. He had heard it in a tavern from a man who traded in information and too much wine. Torven was not a man you spoke about loudly in the city. He had money and he had people who worked for him, and the people who worked for him were not the kind you wanted to meet on a dark road. But he was not untouchable. No man was untouchable if you were willing to walk through the right doors. They reached the village as the sky turned dark. The fire was burning in the iron basket at the center of the village again, and the old man with the white beard was sitting beside it again, as if he had not moved all day. Marin went to the inn without speaking to anyone. Aldrich stopped by the fire. You went up, the old man said. It was not a question. We did, Aldrich said. And... Aldrich sat down on the ground beside the fire and held his hands toward the warmth. The dragon has young, he said. One surviving egg up in the high bowl behind the second ridge. Men came with hammers and tried to destroy them. They wore the mark of a merchant named Torven from the city of Brelin to the east. The dragon has been coming lower looking for those men. The old man was quiet for a long time. The fire snapped and sent a small shower of sparks upward. So it was not hunger, he said. No, Aldrich said, it was grief and anger. The old man nodded slowly, as if this explained something he had suspected for a long time. What will you do? Go to Brelin, Aldrich said. Find Torven. Make sure he does not send any more men up that mountain. And if he resists? Aldrich looked into the fire. He will resist, he said. Men like that always resist. That is why they hire other men to do their work for them and then act surprised when the consequences come back to find them. In the morning, Marin was waiting outside the inn before Aldrich had finished eating. She had her pack on and her knife at her belt, and her face said very clearly that she was coming whether he agreed to it or not. He looked at her for a moment, then went back inside and finished his bread. They rode east toward Brelin, Marin on a brown horse borrowed from the village stable. The road was wide and flat through the valley, then climbed gently through farmland and patches of woodland before dropping down into the wider lowlands where the city sat beside a slow gray river. Aldrich had been to Brelin twice before. It was a merchant city, busy and loud and smelling of river water and animals, full of people who were always in a hurry to get somewhere and sell something. He found it exhausting. But he knew how to move through it. They arrived on the second day in the early afternoon. The city gates were open and no one stopped them. Aldrich kept his hood up and did not look at people directly, which was one of the first things a person learned when moving through a place where someone might know their face. He needed information first, before he went anywhere near Torven's house or warehouse or whatever fortified compound the man called home. Information meant the right kind of tavern, which meant the kind of place that was too busy for anyone to remember you, but busy enough that the people who knew things came to drink. He found it near the river docks, a wide, low building with a green door and no sign. Inside it was warm and crowded and smelled of fish and spilled drink. Aldrich found a seat at the end of a long table and ordered 2 cups of the local ale, one for himself and one to put in front of the empty space beside him as an invitation. It worked, as it usually did, and within half an hour a man with a dock worker's hands and a storyteller's eyes sat down and drank Aldrich's ale and told him, in exchange for a small coin, that Torvend's men had returned from the mountains about 2 weeks ago, that they had brought something back with them in a locked cart, and that the cart had gone directly to Torvend's warehouse on the south side of the city near the old mill. Aldrich thanked the man and left. He found Maren outside, watching the river. He told her what he had learned. She listened without interrupting. "A locked cart," she said, "from the mountain 2 weeks ago." "Whatever they managed to take," he said, "before the dragon drove them off." "Dragon material is sold to collectors," she said. "Rich people in faraway cities who want to own something rare. Torvend would move it quickly. He might have already sold it." "Maybe," Aldrich said, "but the men who went up that mountain are still in this city. I need to speak to them before they disappear into another job." That evening, Aldrich walked to the south end of the city alone. He had told Maren to stay at the inn they had found near the market square, and for once she had agreed without argument, which told him she understood that what came next was not something she should see, or at least that she understood arguing would waste time. Torvend's warehouse was a large building of dark stone with 2 guards at the front door. Aldrich did not go to the front door. He went around the side, found a window that was poorly latched and went in through that. Inside it was dark and smelled of sawdust and something sharp and chemical that he did not recognize. He moved through the darkness carefully, one hand on his sword hilt, letting his eyes adjust. He found the men he was looking for in a back room, 3 of them, playing cards by lamplight. They looked up when the door opened. They had time to see a tall figure in dark clothing. Then Aldrich stepped into the light. "I want to talk about a mountain," he said, "and some eggs." 2 of the men stood up fast. The third, the one with the circle and line mark stitched very visibly onto his coat, stayed seated and looked at Aldrich with the flat expression of a man who had been in this situation before. "Sit down," Aldrich told the 2 standing men, in the tone of voice that left no space for discussion. They sat. Then he pulled a chair over and sat down himself, and he looked at the man with the mark and he said, "Tell me about Torvend. Tell me everything. And then we are going to talk about how this ends." The man with the circle and line mark on his coat was named Das. He was not a brave man, Aldrich decided within the first few minutes. He was the kind of man who did dangerous things, not because he was willing to face danger, but because money made him pretend he was willing. The moment it became clear that Aldrich was not going to leave the room until he had answers, and that Aldrich was larger and more dangerous than anyone Das had met in some time, the man began to talk. Torvend had sent them to the mountain 2 months ago. The job was simple on paper: locate a dragon's nest at the high elevations above the valley village, take what could be taken, damage what could not be carried. Dragon eggs were worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. A cracked egg, even a destroyed one, kept other eggs from hatching and kept the dragon population from growing, which was something certain wealthy people in faraway cities were willing to pay for as well. It was a business, Das said, as if saying the word business made it reasonable. Aldrich did not respond to that. They had found the nest. They had taken 1 egg, the larger one. It had already cracked in the handling and been destroyed before they reached the city, Das admitted, looking at the table. Torvend had been angry about that. The smaller egg they had damaged but not taken. The dragon had come back too soon. They had run. "Where is Torvend now?" Aldrich asked. "His house," Das said. "The big one near the north gate. Stone walls, iron gate, 4 guards at all hours. Aldrich stood up. He looked at the 3 men around the table for a long moment. "You are going to leave this city," he said. "Tonight, all 3 of you. You are going to go somewhere far from here, somewhere far from any mountain with a dragon on it, and you are going to find different work." He paused. "If I hear of any of you going near those mountains again, I will come back. Do you understand me?" They understood him. He left the warehouse the same way he had come in, through the side window, and he walked to the north end of the city. He stood outside Torvind's house for a long time, looking at the stone walls and the iron gate and the guards, and he thought carefully about what he was going to do. Going through the gate was not an option. Going over the wall was possible but noisy. What he needed was something simpler. In the morning, he paid a boy to carry a message to the house. A message that said simply that a knight named Aldrich, who had just spent an evening speaking with Torvind's men about a certain mountain, wished to speak with Torvind himself at noon at the inn near the market square. The message also said, in very plain language, that if Torvind chose not to come, Aldrich would take the information he had gathered to the city magistrate, who he happened to know personally, and who happened to take a very serious view of crimes against protected wildlife, which dragons technically were under the laws of the Eastern Kingdom. This last part was something of a stretch. The laws protecting dragons were very old and almost never used, but Torvind did not need to know that. Torvind came to the inn at noon. He was not what Aldrich had expected. He was small and neat, with carefully combed gray hair and clean hands, and the manner of a man who ran a very organized household. He sat down across from Aldrich and folded his hands on the table and looked at him with eyes that were calculating but not especially afraid. Powerful men rarely feared a single knight. They feared being exposed. "You have been speaking to my employees," Torvind said. "Former employees," Aldrich said. "They left the city last night." Something moved behind Torvind's eyes, not fear, annoyance. "What is it you want exactly?" "3 things," Aldrich said. "First, you will never send anyone near those mountains again. Not your men, not men who work for other people you know, not anyone you have ever had a conversation with. The dragon up there knows the mark your people wear. The next time it sees that mark, it will not drive anyone off. It will burn them, and it will then come down the mountain and look for the person who sent them." Torvind's neat hands tightened slightly on the table. "You cannot make promises on behalf of a dragon." "I'm not making a promise," Aldrich said. "I am telling you what will happen. Second, whatever materials were taken from that mountain, whatever parts or pieces ended up in your hands or the hands of your buyers, you will make quiet arrangements for those things to be returned or destroyed. I do not care which. Third, you will make a payment to the village of Stonehaven. What your actions did to that dragon affected the village below it. They deserve to be compensated." Torvind looked at him for a long time. The inn was busy around them, full of lunchtime noise and the clatter of plates. No one was paying them any attention, which was exactly what Aldrich had chosen this place for. "You are a knight with no army," Torvind said, "and a story about a dragon that no magistrate is going to take seriously." "Perhaps," Aldrich said, "but I also have the names of the 3 men you sent up that mountain, and I have their account of what you asked them to do, which I wrote down last night and sealed in a letter, and which is currently sitting with the innkeeper in the village of Stonehaven, with instructions to send it to the nearest magistrate if I do not return within 2 weeks to collect it." This was also something of a stretch. But it was a very convincing stretch, and Aldrich said it in the tone of voice he used when he needed people to believe things completely. Torvind was quiet. He looked at his hands, he looked at Aldrich, then he looked at his hands again. "The payment to the village," he said finally. "How much?" They settled on a number. It was a good number, enough to repair several rooftops and replace the goats that had been taken and buy the inn a new door, which it badly needed. Torvind paid it within the week, through a third party, as men like him always did things. But it arrived. Aldrich and Marin left Brelin the morning after the meeting. The road back through the valley was easier than the road into the city had been. Something about the direction of travel Aldrich had always found. Going toward a problem always felt harder than leaving one behind. They stopped at the base of the mountain path before entering Stonehaven. Marin looked up at the peaks, at the high gray ridges where clouds were gathering. Somewhere up there, behind the second ridge and through the narrow pass, a dragon was sitting beside a nest with one cracked but living egg, waiting. "Will it be enough," Marin asked, "what we did?" "For the egg to survive," Aldrich said. "I do not know, that is beyond what I can fix." "For Torvin to stay away." "For a while," he said. "Men like him are careful when they are afraid. The fear will wear off eventually. But by then, hopefully, the egg will have hatched and the dragon will be harder to threaten." Marin nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to go back up," she said. "Not now, in the spring. I want to see if the egg is still alive." Aldrich looked at her. "That is a long climb for a maybe," he said. "My father believed it was worth understanding things," she said. "Even hard things, even things that could burn you." She looked at him. "I think he was right." Aldrich looked up at the mountain for a moment. Then he looked at the village, small and ordinary in the gray afternoon light, full of people who had no idea how close things had come